And this is Chipicon. Welcome to the Otherworldly, the talk show for changing times, changing worlds. We will cover many of the things that the conference does in November every week on Wednesdays. Things like divination, magic, complementary and alternative healing, ghosts, supernatural beings, spiritual practices. And tonight, we have Daria, God, let me see if I can get her name right. Skibington-Roffel? Did I
yes.
spell?
Yeah,
good. She is a
Congratulations.
priestess for the dying, and she is dedicated her life to service, to helping people find their way through the process of death and dying. And she does palliative care and crisis intervention and services, spiritual care. And anyway, here I'm going to hope that the speaker view will have her speaking. There's your face. Good. Welcome, Daria, and we are quite pleased to talk about death. Because I think it's something that we don't talk enough about. And if we don't talk about it, how are we going to deal with it? So.
Exactly.
Did anything that I missed that's important in this introduction?
No, you got everything in there.
Okay. The important stuff anyway. So thank you. And yeah, since you've been working at this for some time and professionally, I'm going to put up now and then again at the end your website, so that if people need to contact you in the chat, there we go, then people can find it. And I'll do it again so that people who come in later can find it. What thing have you learned? A month ago, Griffin was talking about this, and he was talking about how people whose families were in denial, it could hurt the process that the individual was dying was going through, and it could rip the family apart. And that was a problem that he had to deal with a lot. What have you learned a lot in your work with the dying?
My work, I think one thing I've always said is let the dying person drive. So they're the ones in charge of it. It's their time. I'm just there to help answer questions and help make the process easier for them, and also to help the family as well. When my mother-in-law died a few years back, her biggest fear was that she had no future. And for months, she kept saying, I have no future, I have no future. And she was Christian, and the Christian pastors, even her own pastor, came to visit her and everything. They prayed, they did all the stuff, told her she was going to be fine, and she wasn't. So on the day she actually died, I remember going into her room at the nursing home that I worked at and she was at. And I said, yeah, I spoke to your doctor. And she said, well, what's happening? You know, they won't tell me what's going on. And I said, well, you're going to die. And she said, well, how long do I have? And I said, well, the doctor said up to 2 weeks, but it could be any time. So she immediately freaked out and said, oh my God, I've got no future. And I said, actually, you do have a future. And I thought, after all this Christian stuff, I'm just going to tell her what I know. And I said, you know, you may not have a future on this planet as yourself, but you are going to be an ancestor now. So all of the kids and grandkids and great grandkids, and they're all going to remember you as Oma Jean, and you're going to be watching over them, making sure they stay out of trouble. And she went, oh, that sounds very important. I said, it is. And she says, well, I'm ready to go. She gave me a few tasks to do. She said, your job's done, my job's done. And she died that night. So I was able to make it easier for her, because when people are dying, they want to know that everything will be okay, that their loved ones will be okay, that they're going to have something whether it's just being an ancestor or whatever it is they believe in. They want to know that their loved ones are going to be okay too. So I remember my mother-in-law often asking us, are you okay? Are you okay? Is everything all right? And yeah, no, we're doing fine. Are you happy? Yes, we're happy. And we had family come visit her the week before, and yeah, she was able to die with all those questions answered.
Not, you do want to, there's a kind of a time limit on answering the questions. So.
Yeah. There is, and that's why I always say, let them ask the questions, be honest, be open, and be brief as you can. And that's pretty much what they need.
Oh, because it's exhausting. Dying is exhausting, and you don't want to waste their energy.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah.
I was thinking of a friend of mine who she got Hodgkin's lymphoma after she had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She apparently was one of 5 people that's happened to. And the doctor just held her and, well, she cried. But as she actually succumbed to it, we were visiting her in the hospital one day, and she said, I've decided I'm going to live. And then she died about 2 hours later. I think that decision was what led her to her beyond life.
Yeah, so a lot of people will say that they're going home, or they might see or hear somebody calling them. But I find that toward the end, most people will say things like, oh, I have to go home, I have to leave, I have to go. And then, you know, that's how you know that they know it's their time. You know, and they'll use different wordings, but it's, and same with I want to live. That's almost like they're saying, okay, I'm ready to go to the next life now. I'm ready to go to the next world.
Certainly a more comfortable life.
Yes.
Yeah, that reminds when my mother died, the night before, her brother and his wife were visiting, and she said, there's somebody in the house with us. And everybody was assuring her, no, there's nobody in the house. And she said, there's somebody's, oh, it's Mother. And it's like, oh, that just made me feel so good that grandmother came to help her over. So.
Yeah, with my mother-in-law, she saw her husband, and my father-in-law was there for her.
And I think that's very common, that somebody comes to help. Maybe that's one of the jobs of an ancestor.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But, you know, not only are they looking out, but they will also be there. I remember when I was about 7, I had a near-death experience, and this is what got me started on this whole path way back when. I was about 7 years old, and we were camping at Mirror Lake in BC, and I decided, rather stupidly, to see how far I could walk into the lake before I got in over my head. Oops. I was trying to be scientific, or I have no idea, 7-year-olds, why do they do what they do? But I walked in there and, of course, got in over my head. And next thing I know, all I could see was myself like trying to get out. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't in that reality anymore. All of a sudden, I was standing in a field. The bright sun was just beaming down on me. And there was a forest in the distance, and it was like a meadow that I was standing in. And there were all these people there. I didn't know any of them because I was 7, but I'm sure my grandfather and, you know, other ancestors were the ones there. And I remember saying, can I go play in the forest? Because when I was 7, I loved to play in the forest. And they said, no, it's not your time. And then I felt like somebody grabbing me from the back of the neck and hauling me up. And that was my brother pulling me out of the lake. And then next thing I know, I'm cold and sputtering water and coughing and everything on the beach, and thinking, okay, yeah, this is, and after that, everything changed. I began to be able to interpret dreams. I started, you know, I had a few more abilities that I hadn't had before. And I was comfortable with death. It didn't bother me at all.
What kind of abilities?
Dream interpretation mostly. Also the ability to sense when spirits are around. And that is something that runs in my family too. My mother's side, there's my second cousin is a medium in Victoria. And I have great aunt who did automatic writing, and she was a medium well known in England. And her daughter also had the same ability, so it kind of runs in the family. But that sort of woke me up to what I could do.
Well, I don't know. At 7, it doesn't seem unusual for somebody to have those kind of abilities. It's usually when you get a little bit older and you start believing the BS, you say, "Oh well, that's not real," and then so you stop being able to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me it was sort of the opposite. But I also became almost obsessed with the spirit and what this soul was all about and everything like that. And I remember I was going to Catholic school, and I remember saying to one of my teachers, this was a year after I was in grade 3, I was 8 years old, and my teacher did not like me, and this really just cemented it for her. I said to her in religion class one day, so if the soul's immortal, like it doesn't die, why does it only get the span of one human life to either prove itself as worthy or unworthy? I said, that doesn't seem right. She's kind of stupid. And she looked at me. She was like, well.
Because that's what we were told. Don't bother me.
Yeah.
And if anyone in the room had that conversation, raise your hand, whether it was a Catholic school or somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I spoke to dead relatives in dreams, so that had no. That was not something that I was particularly concerned about. So I was absolutely certain that that's what was going on. They were like, "Oh, well, when you haven't got your body on, it's a lot easier for people without bodies to reach you there."
Yeah.
So
I remember asking my dad actually that question in the car one night. I said, "Dad, what's a soul?" And he said, "Don't they teach you that in school?" And I said, "Yeah, but it doesn't make sense." So he said, "Well, the body's like a car, and the soul's like the driver, and it gets in and it starts at the car and drives it around to all the places it needs to go. They need to go, and then sometimes the car breaks down or gets into accidents and has to get fixed, and then eventually gets to a point where cars won't run anymore. Maybe it's gotten into too big of an accident, or everything's failed, or it's rusted out." And I said, "So what does the soul do then?" He goes, "I don't know. I guess they take the bus or get a new car." And that made more sense to me than anything I'd learned at school.
So that's how reincarnation works. Reincarnation.
It's a car, yeah.
I love that one. I'm going to remember that.
yeah, I think many of us will use that analogy.
My soul is a rusted out car.
Well, no,
So
that's the
your
body.
body
The
is
soul
car.
is the driver. So you have to decide: are you driving an old car, or have you got a high-end Mercedes? Or
Well, I knew when my mother died that the one person she wanted to see was her mother. So I got thinking about it, and I asked her. I said, "Now, Mom, when all these souls go up to wherever they go, they're all little Tinkerbells. They're like little spots of light,
yeah,
I said, how you gonna find your mother among all these millions of other Tinkerbells?" And she looked me in the eye, and just as serious, she said, "I'll know her."
yep, you do.
And I felt comfortable with her dying completely after, that she knew she could find her mother.
Yeah, I guess
Among all-
spirits recognize each other, right? On the spiritual level, we're all part of the same energy force, whatever. and we recognize each other over time.
Mhm.
And, you know, and it was interesting, someone was mentioning dreams, and lately I've been finding that I've been having dreams, and this has been going on since about 2018, where I've had to resolve someone's issue, a dead person's issue, while in a dream. And it started a couple of years back. I think it was 2018, and there was a festival going on down in the States. I'm in Canada, by the way. So there's a festival going on down in the States, Morgan Festival. And there earlier, or the year before, a lady had been killed in a domestic violence situation. And, you know, it was horrible, of course, obviously. And I remember everybody was very upset, and they did a lot of prayers and everything. And this is about a year or two later, and I'm asleep, and, you know, I'm hanging out with a friend of mine in my dream. And then all of a sudden we're on this boardwalk, which we don't have boardwalks here because we live in the prairies. There's no oceans or water anywhere near us, right? So I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of weird. And my friend and I walk into this shop, and there's a young woman and this guy there who run it. And I kept thinking, God, that lady looks familiar, but I don't know where I know her from. I'm thinking maybe I went to school with her. I'm sure I've met her somewhere. And she came up to me and she said, I need help. I don't have the energy. So I said, and I knew what I had to do. I said, I'll give you my energy. And I gave her a huge hug and passed on some of my energy to her. And then she was like, then she sort of danced off and says, thank you so much. And off she went. And the next day I was sitting there just thinking about that dream. And then I remembered the story that I had read online about this lady years before. And I was like, oh my God, that was her. Because I looked at a picture and I'm like, yeah, that's where I know her from. I'd seen her once or twice in Facebook pictures. Another fellow had asked me to figure out how he died. And I was holding a skull, and it was actually the skull of, I think he was Mexican. And he said, I need to know who killed me, how I died. And I said, well, there was a construction site, and I remember that his body was in one of those cement pipe things, you know, before they put it in the ground. It was an abandoned construction site, and he was a construction worker, and apparently one of his co-workers had done him in. And as soon as I was able to say, okay, this is what happened, he said, thank you so much, I can now move on. And he moved on. And I had no idea who this guy was. I had no idea where this was, but I'm glad I was able to help. You know.
At least he didn't ask you to find his body.
Yeah. Well, actually, I knew where the body was. I told him, your body is in this pipe. And, you know, in the dream, I had called.
You didn't have to go find.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was very weird.
But looking.
I was looking at the question here.
What's the question? I missed it. It went by too fast.
So how much say does a dying person have in the decision of when to go to the other side? For example, someone who's elderly and has a non-curable condition and really wants to die, but keeps having near-death experience after another. What do you think is happening? Yeah, I used to see this a lot when I worked at the nursing home, because of course, a lot of them there, you could just tell they were well past their time. I could tell anyways. How is it that you're still here? You know, and I think in those cases, I don't know if it's our medical system is advanced enough that they can resuscitate people. My mother-in-law had it very clear that she was not to be resuscitated, so they did not do that with her. But in some places and some families, right across the hall from my mother-in-law was a family that would not let their mother die for love or money. And this poor woman cried and cried all the time, saying, let me die, let me die. And the kids weren't having any of it. So when I told the nurse, you know what, just keep my mother-in-law clean, keep her comfortable. That's all I ask. and you know, she'll go in her time, and we're cool with that. We're okay with that. And the nurse just breathed a sigh of relief, and she said, "Oh, thank God," because these people up the hall, holy moly, you know, because they realized she was in pain, but the family was, you know, everything had been signed over to them, right? They had power of attorney, they had agency, so she had no decision in that at all.
Yeah, and I'd like to interject a brief note. The one thing I said talking to Chipicon about the idea from my presentation was a line she latched onto. Our inability or unwillingness to accept and acknowledge our own mortality is the primary driver of spiritual malfunction in the world. And every time you talk about one of these, whether they can't let go or the family can't let go, it's always the same.
And sometimes it's community too. I remember when Isaac Bonowitz was dying.
Oh God.
We had we were doing a Druid festival in central Alberta. And I remember one of the people came up to me and said, "Could we do a ritual of healing for Isaac?" And I said, "No." I said, "We can do a ritual because if we do a healing ritual, we're basically telling the universe we don't want him to die, and he is terminal. So if it is his time, what we should be praying for is that if it's to be the end, let him go quickly, let him go peacefully, let him go without pain. And if he gets better, then he gets better."
Yeah, I was back during that period. I'd seen that he was, you know, in hospice, but there were drum circles, there were prayer circles, and I went to his Facebook page because we were friends, and said, "Isaac, don't you listen to anybody else. If you're ready to die, you go ahead and do it." And the next day he died. Now, I don't think he was reading his Facebook page. And what makes me feel really awful is the next person to read that was probably his wife. And that probably felt awful to her, but still it needed to be said.
Yeah, because that's one of the things the dying people need, is to know that everybody is okay with them going. They need to know that everything is okay, their loved ones are okay, everybody's fine, and they can go in peace. And a lot of times people will do prayer circles and drum circles and all these things to stop them. And I remember we had one lady at the nursing home, you know, who wanted to go, and she'd go around, you know, "I'm going to die. I'm going to die." And she was like totally fine with it. No problem. You know, she had liver cancer and she was ready. But her church group kept coming in and doing all these prayer circles, and she kept having a lot of these near-death experiences. And then when her time finally came, she died screaming, and it was horrible. The nurses were saying that it was one of the worst they'd ever seen. And I thought, God, if only somebody, you know, one of her loved ones could have said, "You know what? It's okay. It's okay to go."
I read a book about the power of prayer once, and a gentleman had a church group, and he was pretty much ready to die, and everybody prayed, and he lived. And about 2 years later, he was sick again, and they said, "Oh my gosh, this infection is just running away. We're really concerned." And the man said to the nurse, "They're not going to get me this time." they can't get that prayer circle up in time. They can't get me. And I just like, yes. I just feel so sorry for him that he was kept alive a couple of years, and he could have been happy.
Yeah, he could have been already in blissful, well on his way to the next adventure.
Yeah,
and
being an ancestor.
Yeah, being an ancestor, going to a new life, whatever it is that people believe, right? And I remember when the coronavirus, you know, when pandemic started a couple of years back, in April, there was someone on one of the Psychopomp Facebook groups who said, "Is anyone doing anything to help these people who are dying of COVID who are comatose because their families can't be with them? The nurses and doctors are up to their eyeballs in people. They don't always have time to sit with them." And so she had suggested that at night everybody do sort of prayer. And I've been doing this prayer since then, and I still do it. And it's just a simple prayer. I've actually got it on my website. Just to, I reach out to and pray for the spirits of the dead. I'm here to stand with you as your companion, not in judgment, but in love, to help see you cross the threshold to the other side, and to let them know that it's okay, that they're not alone, that they're loved, and that, you know, may they find their path, may they find their peace, may they find their truth, and may they be forever blessed. Very simple, you know, open the portal and close the portal. But I've been doing it ever since. And right now with the war going on, you know, it seems like I still need to do it. And yeah, it's been very powerful. And I hope it's been helpful for people passing on suddenly.
Yeah, I think that is a beautiful thing for the dying alone. That's incredibly isolating.
Mm-hmm.
I love the hospice movement. I love that
Well,
people.
there's some people who really prefer to die alone. Their family will stay there and stay there and stay there till 2:00 in the morning, and they'll die at 4:00 because they wanted to be alone.
That reminds me of my mom when her father died. Her father was in hospital with cancer, and he was dying. And the nurse had called the family. My grandma, my aunt, and my mom were all together at the house. And the nurse said, you know, we don't think he's going to make it through the night. You may want to, if you want to say your goodbyes, I think you better come down now and do that. Then all of a sudden, you know, Mom and Nana and my Aunt Jill, they all got ready. They you know, got their coats on there. And all of a sudden, every one of them got sick, like sick. So they all went to bed and just felt like crap. They couldn't leave the house at all. And then in the morning, I think it was early in the morning, all of a sudden they all felt better. They felt fine. The phone rang. It was a nurse saying he just died. So it was like he just did not want them there.
Whoa, he
very
got
clear.
a power.
Yeah.
Well, say
I
kind
may,
of-
my grandfather passed, decade and a half, 2 decades ago,
something like that.
83.
Yeah.
And he was in a coma in the hospital. And there were family to come from all over the country, California, Denver. He waited, actually, his wife, that he divorced in the 70s, died, was it 3 days before or 3 days after? She was already there. It was 3 days before he went in the hospital, I think.
Yeah, she died first.
Actually, no.
Oh,
My uncle and aunt were on their way from Denver, and when they changed planes, they got the notification that she had died
right.
back in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
They were on their way to see Grandpa. And first of all, my aunt, one of the first things she told him lying there was, "Now don't get in an argument with Mom when you get there."
Worst thing anyone could have said under this. And how long
But
did he
aside
hang
from
on?
that, he actually hung on in the hospital until everybody who could possibly get there had been there. And then he died 3 hours after we'd last been to the hospital.
Yeah, that happens too. I've seen that. My mother-in-law, we made sure she phoned her family in Holland. People came and visited her for a week. She saw and talked to everybody, like literally everyone she could possibly talk to. And I think that made it easier for her as well.
Yeah.
I often think about, I would not invite you in my bedroom to watch me sleep.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I want to invite you into my room to die.
Yeah. My mother-in-law kicked us out of the room just before she died. She said, go. She goes, we were down in the atrium area. It was just before Christmas. We were down in the atrium area. I was holding her hand, just sort of humming Christmas carols. And she was holding my hand. It was a really nice Kodak type moment. And all of a sudden she's like, I gotta go back upstairs. I have to go back upstairs. And so I took her back upstairs, and she said, I want to face the window. And I said, put her in front of the window. And she said, now get out of here. So we left. And then, yeah, we got the phone call when we got home. So.
Right. And
Yeah.
I know that when Jen's dad died, there was an interesting experience. Now, he was completely comatose at the time and was not expressing opinions of any sort. However, the people who were actually there at the bedside were me and Jen and Jen's mom.
Yeah.
And we were just, it was like we knew it was any minute now. And suddenly mom turns and looks at both of us and say, I'd like to have a couple minutes with my husband, please.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we got our asses out the door.
Yeah.
And literally a couple of minutes later, she pulled the curtain back. And first thing, my eyes went up to the monitor. So and the second thing I did was turn around and go back, talk to the charge nurse and say it's over.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
she knew, and she wanted to be, they wanted their privacy.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And same with my mother-in-law. We had put her wedding picture in the window so she could, we had all these pictures of her and Jerry in the window. So she could watch, so she could look at them. And we gave her time to be with them.
Mhm.
She kept saying, you know, I can hear Jerry calling me. I can hear Jerry calling me. He's calling me from the corner. So we knew. You know, and that's one of those things. A lot of people, I remember when Airdrie Hospice had started, one of the vision statements was no one dies alone. And I thought, well, there are quite a few people who will literally wait until somebody's out of the room, or they'll kick you out of the room.
Yeah.
So that, because they don't want you to go through the pain of watching them die. That's one of the main things. They love you that much, they don't want to see you die. Sometimes they'll hang on to see a grandchild born or somebody graduate school or something like that. But normally they just want to make sure everybody's okay and that they're okay with them leaving.
If you ever look at the obituaries at Christmas, nobody dies on Christmas, but the day after
They'll
is
publish them.
full.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my family tends to be after Easter for some reason. My grandmother died after Easter.
My mother was Palm Sunday.
Oh, was she?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you gather for Easter?
No. We used to when we were all kids still, and my mom would put on an Easter dinner, and we'd have all the cousins would come over, and we weren't religious. My family was not religious at all and still isn't. I'm probably the most religious person, and I'm pagan. So that tells you a lot right there. When I told my mom I was pagan, I was 19, and she said, the only thing she said was, oh, you're not getting into religion, are you? That was her.
I don't organize one.
Yep.
Disorganized religion.
I was going to say disorganized.
Disorganized, yeah.
Yeah, we can't resist that straight line.
Oh,
Yep.
heck no. I mean, I think of democratic religions and Republican religions. And it's like Will Rogers said, I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat.
Yeah.
And, it's like that with religions. And of course, we know Isaac for one of his famous statements. So, yeah.
It's like I say, I'm a druid.
Mhm.
You're what?
I'm a druid. I walk, like up the middle, as it were. Very centrist.
Well, and we all have our perspective because, I'm a Zen Buddhist,
Mhm.
and I've had a practice about almost 30 years now. And I almost got into real religion, thought real hard about going to seminary out of high school and becoming a Lutheran minister, because after high school, I was invited to sing in the church choir where my chorus teacher happened to be the choir master. I loved that so much, I'd do anything to keep singing.
Mhm.
But that didn't pan out. And lo and behold, I was never suited for the academic environment. So I just went my random way. So it's like they say religion. I guess I have a religion, but please don't ask me.
Yeah.
There's no elevator
path.
speech for it.
I still don't have one. I'm not
I don't-
Wiccan. I do witchcraft, but
I don't have one.
yeah.
Well, I have a religion. I don't have a religious group identity of any sort. So
Yeah. I'm the oddball solitary druid myself too, so I just do my thing. Seeking the truth against the world, that's all it is.
Mhm.
Yep.
I wish my religious thoughts were a little more organized, but they're not. I mean,
Yes.
all I can say is I believe in the afterlife.
Yeah.
That's not a religion.
No,
Well,
that's a spiritual. That's a
Well,
spiritual.
no, well, you want to start slicing and dicing that when we're supposed to be on another topic.
Yeah.
The idea of religion versus spirituality. And to me, when you think religion, I don't just say organized religion, I say corporate religion.
Mm.
And I'm as far away as that as you can get.
Yeah.
Because, there is organized religion. But then, a lot of what we think of, especially the Abrahamic religions, the three big ones, largest, especially the Catholic Church, largest corporation in the world on a lot of measures. But so I have a strong spiritual base and a strong spiritual focus. But if I want a religion, I'm going to have to invent one. I doubt I could ever top the spaghetti thing. So.
The feature of the flying spaghetti monster, which
Right.
is all about not taking your religion too seriously.
Well, they tried to invent a religion so ridiculous that it couldn't possibly be believed. And the next thing you know, the world is full of what people are calling themselves as pastafarians.
Yep.
So.
Yes. Okay. So we got to get back to talking about death, because the more we talk about it, the better we'll deal. And,
Well, I had an experience that I wonder if anybody else had. And I was taking care of my dad at the end, and he had difficulty moving, and so he actually couldn't get in bed. So I was in the bed with my hands under his arms, holding him in bed. All of a sudden, he sat up, and talked to someone in the room. And then lay back down, and he didn't die that night. But it was like 2 nights before he died. Did anyone else ever have that experience?
I've heard of that experience happening, yeah.
He was talking to someone like my mother, or there was someone there for him.
Yeah.
That's
And
not
sometimes
surprising.
they will show up a few days in advance.
Okay.
how far in advance?
I've heard, let's see, when my grandmother died, I got the vision of her dying, just over a week before. I was driving home from work. It was dark. It was raining. I was just driving along. I was 22 years old. And I remember all of a sudden I saw this whole scenario rolling through my mind of my mom phoning me. And I had just gotten out of the shower. And my mom's like, "Are you going to work today?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to work today." And okay, well, Nana died last night. Oh, but she's, she died in her sleep, it's all good, blah, blah, blah. And I remember crying in the car, and I was like, what the hell? My grandma's fine. And then about 9 days later, I had to take 2 days off of work because I wasn't well and my car was broken down and all this, and I got it fixed. And on the Wednesday, my mother phones me at 7 a.m. And I just gotten out of the shower, so I had my bathrobe on, my hair's all wet. And she said, "You going to work today?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Oh, okay. Well, by the way, Nana died last night." And I was like, "Oh my God, okay, this is weird." And she said, "But it was okay. She died in her sleep. She didn't suffer, nothing like that." And I said, "Holy shit, Mom, I saw this entire conversation about 9 days ago." She goes, "Yeah, I figured you already knew, but I just thought I'd better tell you." So yeah, that was quite the thing. And yeah, it depends. Some people will. I know when our nephew died, he died suddenly. He died in a car accident, and people were saying, and he was always sort of the punker kid who didn't seem to have his stuff together. And then But when all his friends were talking about him at the funeral, they all said, the last 3 months, he was like a Zen master. He seemed to have it all together. He was happy. He wasn't tormented. He seemed like, the whole future was wide open for him, and he knew what he was doing. And within 3 months, he had died in a car crash. So it's like people know. And I remember that when the last time I'd seen my grandmother, which was 2 or 3 days before she died, she hugged me and she said, "God bless you." And she never, ever said that.
Ooh.
And I said, "Yeah, you too, Nana. See you next week." And she grabbed my wrist really hard. She said, "No, God bless you." And I said, "Okay, God bless you too, Nana." That was the last time I saw her. So yeah, I could definitely see people having those experiences a few days or even months before.
I also I noticed on your website that you talk about helping pets, or is it that is this more of the grief support with people who have lost pets?
I've been there when pets have died. And because to me, a pet is just like anyone else, right? So they're part of the family. In fact, it's often harder to lose a pet than it is to lose a relative, because your pets don't judge you. They're never going to ask when you're going to get married or what, they won't criticize you. They just love you because you feed them and they love you and you love them, and it's all good.
And the size of the animal doesn't seem to matter, because we kept
doesn't matter.
And what ground me down after a
I
while.
don't know why, but as soon as you started talking about pets dying, mine jumped off the bed.
Oh,
Like running for the hill. Not today.
we owned a large number of rats over quite a number of years. And I think the one thing that finally broke me of the habit was I got tired of losing a kid or two every year.
Mhm.
And, you take them to the vet, or you find them dead in the cage. And it doesn't matter, like with, some of our cats. But yeah, I mean, it's a living thing. It's bonded to you. We had one that I don't know what her obsession was, but if I lay down on the couch, she would come up, perch on a pin, and polish my nose
With her tongue.
with her tongue. I had the shiniest nose in Syracuse. But because there's a grieving for the owners, but I look at our older cat, 17 years old now, still chugging along, but to a large degree, I consider her a hospice patient.
Yeah.
She gets a lot of palliative care in terms of ignoring the occasional malfunctions, like incurable hairballs, or when she comes up, and I can tell she needs comforting.
Yeah. Now, I also participate in helping pets pass. It began with one of our rats who was my heart rat, Lola. And when she died, she kept talking to me afterwards. And since then, she has helped me help many other pets of ours and other people's make the passage. I actually have every expectation that the cat Toaster is going to join her doing this whenever she goes someday.
Yeah.
But she has helped with cats and dogs and birds and all kinds of animals.
Yeah, I've actually done it for wild animals too. We had a coyote, I think not this past year, but the year before in the wintertime. So it was 2020, I think December 2020. And there were reports of this coyote in the neighborhood. And they called animal control to move the coyote. And all of a sudden we had these two guys at our door, the animal control people, and they said, there's a coyote sitting kind of in your back, just behind your backyard there. You're going to hear a gunshot. Please don't be alarmed. We have to put the coyote down because he's been poisoned. Somebody in the neighborhood poisoned him. He was sitting out there dying. So I actually went out onto my back deck and I was looking at the coyote, and the coyote was looking at me, and I connected, and I said, I'm gonna sing your soul home. And I did that prayer. As the animal control guy had the gun pointed at the poor coyote, and as soon as he fired the bullet, I kept saying the prayers, and yeah, like the coyote, you know, when he and I connected, he just seemed to settle. He kind of got up, he turned around a few times like he was getting comfortable, and then he just kind of laid down like he was ready. And
Okay.
that's how I help animals pass over. Our 18-year-old cat recently died January 31st. We had to have him put down because his time had come. We knew it was coming. And fortunately, we have a vet that comes to the house to do it. So
good.
it was
Oh, that's nice.
so much better that way. And, you know, Ron sat with him, my husband sat with him, and I sat with him. And so I've always held my animals, my cats, when they've died.
Yes.
And Riesling was a hard one, because when Ron and I first got together, before we got married, we had gotten this kitten, Riesling, and he'd been our cat since we were together. So yeah, it was really hard. I've done pet memorial services at funeral homes even.
Nice.
2019. I was asked to go to one of the funeral homes in Calgary and actually do a pet memorial service. So here I'm at the front of the, at the pulpit, and there's all the people in the pews and everything at the funeral home. And I did a Rainbow Bridge memorial service.
Nice.
Explained what the Rainbow Bridge was in Norse mythology, and there was a poem that someone had written about it, which was really nice. And a few other people got up and presented about different aspects of pet loss. And I was actually scheduled to do it again in 2020, and then the pandemic hit. So I haven't been able to do it since, but it was a wonderful experience. And everybody got to write a message to their pets on a piece of paper. And then outside we had a cauldron, and I did a prayer so that all their words would go into the fire, but would go up to their animals. And people said that was really helpful.
I would love to be able to do that level of care.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to work at a semi-pro level because right now at my age and with my, as they so politely call it, underlying medical conditions, I have a limited amount of energy, and the bulk of that goes to being Jen's caregiver, taking care of myself, and then doing all the shopping and housework and all. And I just don't travel well anymore. That's just why I'm so happy to have
Neither of us
a
does.
venue
Yeah.
like this. I mean, it was a thrill being at CTCW. It was a thrill doing my presentation a month ago. I can reach out. But, we're talking about the Rainbow Bridge. Well, Bifrost from the North stuff, I have a more generalized vision of it. But we do know, and Jen has described that when an animal passes of ours or somebody that she's in contact with, she'll see.
Why don't I tell this?
Okay.
When I get in touch with Lola to help an animal pass, there's like a train station platform that she's on. There's a wall to one side and then the platform. And I happened to, holding one of our rats as they passed, I saw them come from behind my head into the view and walk up to Lola.
Aww.
And that, if you're gonna know the exact moment someone passes, that's it.
Yeah.
And I've seen similar for so many other animals that she has helped in this way. She's there to greet them and to introduce them around and show them what's what. But for me, somehow it's a train depot.
Yeah, and I see it a little differently. I don't very often see it. But when we had to have one of our cats put down, Artemis, the one male cat we've owned, poor guy, he was one of these hard case rescues who had gotten a broken pelvis by getting run over a month before he was rescued. But he lived well enough with us, and he seemed to be losing weight. We took him in, and the vet said, 75% of his left rear leg has wasted away.
Yeah.
So when he passed, they managed to get the needle in. Again, I saw him come in. It was on the left side, but it was more like it was just the bridge. And it wasn't just Lola there. There's a freaking zoo waiting at the bottom of the bridge. They were all there. And I said, oh my God, we've had all that many rats, birds, and all of that.
Yeah.
So the one
Her
time I
family
actually
was there.
did get to see the bridge, it was quite a remarkable experience.
For me, I see with people and with animals, I often see their soul sort of interposed over their face. You know, kind of like when you've got one of those books with the clear page that you can put over something and it has a diagram or whatever, and then you can move it off. That's how I often see it. So a friend of mine, her cat had died at the vet, and I got there just after the cat had died. But I remember looking at the cat and I'm like, she's still there. She still looked alive, even though she was long dead. But I could tell her spirit was still there. And then as soon as I prayed to Bridget to let her to take the cat, under her mantle and protect her, all of a sudden, then I saw that that sort of forward face just disappear, and then the cat just, you knew that's when the soul left the body. And when my Tika died, she was 18 years old as well, and it was at home, and I remember holding her, and I could feel her as if she was still alive, even though I knew she was dead. And she stayed for a while, and we all had her cry and everything else. And then I said the prayers, and then the body got really heavy all of a sudden, and that that soul was not there. So for me, I see them, just there, and then they're gone.
It sounds like you're actually seeing the first part of the process on this side, and I'm seeing the part on the other side.
Yeah. And when my grandma died, I remember seeing her face imposed on a photo, and this was a week after she died. We were having a reception at my parents' house, and I looked up at her picture, her most recent one, and she winked at me. So I saw and I see people. That's how I see people when I first meet them too. I see the spirit before I see the person.
Okay.
So I can usually tell right away if I'm going to get along with them or not. It's weird. I can feel and see it right away.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of, it's really personal, and the experience is going to be, some people want to be with their family, some people want to be alone.
Well, yeah.
I think everybody wants to not be in pain, and I suppose grief support is trying to figure out what they want and helping the people who are dealing with it afterwards, because you're here for the people who are still alive, and somebody on the other side can help them once they've died.
Yeah, and I facilitate grief groups, actually. I've done it for a few years now, and you know what I found seems to help people the most, and it's so weird that people don't realize this, that it's normal. And what they're feeling is absolutely, totally normal. That is what we do when we lose anything, whether it's a job, a person.
Our society puts such an emphasis on going back to work eventually.
Back to normal. Like, why can't you get over it?
Yeah.
I always tell people, you just feel free to tell those people to piss off.
Yeah. My hospice training did give me the basics of grief counseling. And I also read the update about how Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has updated her stages of dying to phases of dying, because I've now learned that too is personal. Everybody goes through the same, I think it's 5 phases. No two people do it the same way at the same time and at the same speed.
And those phases of grief are actually, she actually put those together for person receiving the terminal diagnosis. It wasn't for the people grieving.
Oh, I know. And that's what's so fascinating, that, because, the idea that she specifically wrote this, but then you realize that it's like the person with the terminal diagnosis is grieving for the life they're losing.
Yes.
And the people who are left behind are grieving from the life. And the emotions, the feelings, the experiences are so much alike.
Yeah.
And that was what struck me and helped link the whole life-death thing together was, and because I had read Kubler-Ross years ago, and it was just one of these incidental things I picked up, and it impressed me very much. But then to see it come back and have somebody point out that counseling a person who's dying is counseling a person who's grieving already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And you have the anticipatory grief of the family and loved ones as well.
Yes.
So some people will be worried that they're not grieving enough. And when my mother-in-law died, I didn't cry because I'd been with her for 3 years prior to that, already knowing that it was going to happen. So for me, it wasn't that hard when she did. I think it was about 2 years later on the at Christmas, I actually cried for the first time.
well,
Because yeah, like it just
you never know how long it's going to take. One of the cases reported to me in my hospice training was a woman with a terminal diagnosis who lived until her sons all graduated high school, and there were 4 of them. And as soon as they went off to college, then she started grieving for her husband who had died before that.
Yep.
And she didn't grieve a bit. She just soldiered on. Once the boys were out on their own, then it was off to the grief counselor to fall apart.
Yeah. Yeah, people will do that. Some people do respond to grief through acts of service. So they look after everybody else. They're the fawners. You know, you have the freezers, the people who just can't do anything. You've got the fighters, you've got the flighters, and then you've got the fawners. And the fawners are the ones who take care of everybody else first. And then they'll grieve, and then they'll fall apart, and then they're like, which is actually, it's harder for them that way because all of a sudden there's no one there to look after them. They've been looking after everybody else.
Right.
That's when they need someone to fawn over them for a bit. You know.
I find it easier working with the terminal people and helping them understand the process and not being afraid of it and not being scared, knowing it's a natural and that they're okay and I'm there and I'll be there with them. And I find that easier than dealing with the grievers.
Yeah, I'll buy that. And I also suddenly had a stray thought that popped up in the middle of that about people who are upset with themselves because they don't feel like they're grieving enough. And sometimes, why don't I, or worse yet, why am I glad that my mother died?
Yeah.
And you got to counsel these people to realize you have given a chunk of your heart and your life to help her at the end. The pressure's off.
Yes.
And when my father was dying, I was up in New Hampshire and Dad was in a hospital in New Jersey. And I knew the moment he died because I hadn't noticed it before, but there was this noise in my head, like some bear had just gotten into a beehive. And one night I was sitting in my room and working at my cube, and suddenly I just stopped and wait, the noise stopped. And sure enough, I got a call not too long later from my brother. So those are some of the tough cases where a person has invested so much in helping a dying person, they don't recognize the hurt they've taken themselves, and that interferes with grieving. They can't bring themselves to do it.
Yeah, there's also the sudden deaths. And I think when I was with victim services, I used to be a victim advocate. So I was the one who went with police to the door to tell families that so-and-so had died. And I think in the 10 years that I did that, I must have attended 100 suicides. And many times the person was still there in the house. So it was very interesting, and people who'd been victims of homicide, or people who just died suddenly because accidents, they just died. You know, some people just do that. There was no warning or anything like that, and that helped me deal with the sudden death and even the high crisis deaths that a lot of people, you know, you don't see when you do this kind of work, because you tend to be working with people who are palliative, who are dying slowly. And I was really grateful to have the opportunity to be there for families and the deceased at these sudden deaths, or even just being there with the family after they got the announcement that someone had died for whatever reason, if it was an accident or suicide. And you know, that's something a lot of people don't talk about as well, are suicides. And you know,
Lord.
I remember the first one I went to that was a suicide. That one hit me hard because it was a young man, a soldier. He had 2 little kids and a wife, and he died by suicide. And I remember really struggling with that, because growing up, my British parents always said, you know, suicide's for cowards, you know, and I actually had to sit in the bath and think about this and actually talk to the Morgan, one of my matron goddesses, and you know, and she put it to me very straight. She said, suicide is like any other type of death. There's a reason for it. And sometimes that reason is that what they've seen or what they've done or what's happened in their life is so unbearable. It's like a disease. It's like having cancer. In fact, many people will try many times before they finally hit that point, you know? So that's how I see it now. I actually have absolute compassion for people who have died by suicide, because I see it like
I would not judge a suicide.
No,
Never.
You just don't know why. You do, and I remember one practitioner I met in a discussion on suicide, and pointing out that there are a lot of suicidal people who can be helped.
Yes.
And it really, the thing that she said that smacked me between the eyes was, suicide is a permanent answer to a temporary problem. And
Absolutely. And it's the most selfish thing you can do. But
well,
sometimes people can't get the help.
No,
To-
you know, and or
to prevent
they don't tell people, or they pretend they don't need help. And it, you know, and as somebody once said, the most intensely suicidal person has only been truly suicidal for maybe 5 or 10 minutes in their life. It's a,
So
you know,
thanks.
so getting there in time, doing the right thing. But sudden death is, I remember I was about 12 years old. My Aunt Helen lived in Philadelphia. It was my father's older sister. Her husband came home from work one day, you know, hi honey, I'm home. Walked into the kitchen, dropped dead of a heart attack.
Yeah.
You literally just plop on the floor.
Yeah.
And that was a little rough. What do you mean Uncle Jack died?
Yeah.
And my
Bill,
memories of that are a bit vague, but
I want to respond to someone who's spoken, and I said that suicide was the most selfish thing you could do. It isn't for the person, it is for the family.
Yeah, and the thing, and I had that struggle as well, that first suicide I attended. And then I was told by the Morgan, people die when and as they will. And, you know, we all have our time. And to me, a person has died. There is a grieving family left over. And it's not my place to judge. People have died for a reason. That's beyond my control. It's up to the gods, the universe, whatever. But they've been driven to that point for a reason. And I am not going to judge them based on that reason. I can't. To me, every soul, you know, that's why I always say, whatever you've done in your life or not done in your lifetime, I stand with you, not in judgment, but in love, to open the gateway for you and to see you cross the threshold from life to death and beyond. Because to me, no matter how you die in this lifetime, maybe that's your lesson, or maybe that's how the universe has decided this is your time. Sometimes it is how it is. And as horrible as it is for the families, it's that person has died for some reason. And for me, that soldier who watched his friends blown up in front of him by an IED in Iraq, I mean,
Right.
that's not something you can get out of your head. And he had all the therapy and the pills and the psychiatrists, and in Canada we have free healthcare. He had access to all of it. But
Right.
sometimes you just sometimes your soul is too damaged
Mhm.
by what you've seen or experienced, and it has to die. It's just like the car thing, right?
Yeah.
It gets to a point.
Mm.
Don't ever judge somebody else's pain because you're not inside them.
No,
Yeah.
I
there
would
is no
much
metric
like-
for pain.
No.
I would very much like to. Can we have a couple more positive? We're at time, but I'd like to get beyond this.
Oh, the
little bit more-
negativity.
Something
Hmm.
more about the positive aspects of death before we end the recording.
Well, I
One
think
of the things I've always seen at the desk is it seems like the person gets lighter, like just an ounce, just something. Has anyone else seen that?
my mother-in-law, when she passed, I actually
Mm.
was the one to identify her before her cremation, because by law in Alberta, you have to see the person before they get cremated. And they had dressed her up in her favorite dress that she'd worn to our wedding, and she had her hands clasped with a rose, and she looked absolutely gorgeous. I had never seen her look so beautiful in the time that I'd known her. Her
Mm.
face was totally at peace. Her hair was perfectly done the way she liked it. She had and I thought, she had a good death. And,
Yeah.
most people do all of a sudden look like they're at absolute peace,
Mhm.
because they are.
And a
they're
good
free
death
from life.
is something that when you look at the ones you have to help with that are bad deaths, in that
Mhm.
sense, my last hospice patient had a good death.
Mhm.
He had beaten cancer 3 times. He was an old man, older than me. He was losing the war to the 4th. He knew it. His wife knew it and accepted it. I met his sons. They knew it. They accepted it. And I worked with him from a time when he was still able to get out into the living room in a transfer chair and sit and watch TV with us and have his dinner, to where my last night on duty, he was completely unresponsive. His wife was just sitting there holding his hand. So I punched in, went over and sat down on the other side. And apparently the first time all day he moved. He looked over at me and reached out his hand. So I spent my 2-hour shift holding his hand, and he died that night. And I didn't see him afterwards, so I don't know, how that turned out. But apparently he went very quietly, and apparently he was happy to have people with him. So that takes the burn out of some of the ones that go badly.
Yeah, and the ones who go suddenly too. One thing I always found when, especially with the crisis intervention, was it didn't matter what the cause of death was. I'd start asking questions about, like one lady, she had all these funny magnets on the fridge. And I said, who's the funny magnet collector? Because I collect them too, right? And her husband, oh, that was my wife. And then all of a sudden we're laughing about these silly little magnets on the fridge.
Yeah.
Another family, this was a very wealthy family, and it had been after another sudden death, and they're all drinking, they're having fun. The cops were all there, and they're telling them, okay, you have to give us your phones because we have to investigate, and they were cracking jokes about how they were going to take the backs off their iPhones because they all had the exact same iPhone. And then they were just going to put them in the thing and make them guess who was whose. This family
Siri,
was
where's my
a
damn
riot.
phone?
We're telling funny stories about motorcycles, and everything else. People are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. and kids, adults, anyone,
Yeah.
no matter how crappy the situation is or how hard it is, when we can support each other and help each other see the good and the fun and the good memories and everything else, and respect their grieving process and a person's dying process, I think it just makes it a lot easier for everybody. Because we're born, we're going to die. It's part of life, and we need to make it part of the conversation again.
And these crisis deaths obviously are hard for the family to get their claws out of. And one of the techniques I was taught was diversion. So you try the fridge magnet thing is brilliant. And you try to find. I did the same thing with, it wasn't a hospice patient. It was just a 95-year-old man who kind of needed help getting started in the morning and going to bed. And I noticed a piece of needlework on the wall. So I asked, what's that all about? And I, do you do that? And no, my daughter does that. So even though it wasn't necessary for the case specifically, well, first of all, with all the needlework that Feather Stitch does, like you can't guess from the name, it was really nice just to talk about. So yeah, the diversion to the positive aspects of the life that remains.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to take this moment to, I like the ending on respect for the process.
May I ask for that prayer to be said to all of Ukrainians?
I've been doing that every night.
Good,
Every day,
good,
every
good.
night.
On her website, and I'm going to put on to any of you want to find the prayer. It's on Daria's website, which is going into the chat now. If you want to find it later, then click the three little dots that record it to your.
If you want, I can say the prayer right now. It's very short.
That would be very
I
pleasant.
can
Go
do
for
that
it.
prayer, and we can all just sort of put our energy to those in the Ukraine and everywhere else that are going through it right now. So
Okay.
I reach out to and pray for the spirits of the dead and the spirits of those who are dying. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you are, whenever you are, whatever you've done or not done in your lifetime, I stand with you as your companion, not in judgment, but in love, to open the gateway for you and to see you cross the threshold from life to death and beyond. And as you cross that threshold, you'll be greeted by the ancestors, your beloved mighty dead, and the divine, however you perceive it. Tonight you go home to your home of autumn, winter, spring, and summer, to the blessed realms, to the restful haven of the waveless sea. And as you take these next steps upon your soul's journey, know that you are loved, that you're not alone, and that all is well for you now. May you find your way, may you find answers, may you find your truth, and may you find peace. May you be forever blessed. And now I close the gateway in love. Owen.
I thought you were opening
Thank you.
gateway.
That is beautiful.
Thank you for sharing the prayer with us. I'm stopping the recording now, but I'm not closing the thing.